Welcome to Digital and FinTech Analytics channel.
So let's understand the concept of temporal ripple effect with the help of an example. We have Chris, who is a customer of an e-commerce store, and the e-commerce store has only 10 items in it. So Chris has done around 3 transactions from the e-commerce store. In the first transaction being the earliest transaction and the third transaction being the most recent transaction. So it has been sorted in terms of transaction date. So in the first transaction, say like Chris has purchased item number 0, item number 1 and item number 2. So Chris can only purchase out of these 10 items. So each of the transaction will be represented by a vector of 10 items where each of the indices of the vector represents the item number. So basically the item IDs or product IDs is being represented by the vector of uh, 10 numbers where each indices represents the product ID or item ID. So assume Chris has purchased item number 0, item number 1 and item number 2 in the first transactions. Then only those item numbers will be marked in the first transaction and rest will be 0. So that will signify that Chris has purchased item number 0, item number 1 and item number 2 in the first transaction. Similarly, say like Chris has purchased item number 3, 4 and 5 in the second transaction. Then only those item number will be marked in the second transaction and rest of the item numbers will be 0. Similarly, consider like Chris has purchased item number 6, 7, 8, 9 in the third transaction. Then only those item numbers will be marked. Uh, so now we have created a vector representation of 3 transactions. Now how to give values to this vector that will make more sense is what we will see in our next step. So what we do over here is like we introduce the concept of temporal ripple effect. Now understand what is a ripple. So when you throw a stone in a water, a ripple is being created. So the ripple looks something like this, and the inner part of the ripple will be having more strength, and as the ripple moves outward, the strength of the ripple decreases or diminishes. Similarly, over here, what we are doing is like we are giving more weightage to the items that have been purchased in the third transaction and or the most recent transaction, and the rest and less weightage has been given to the item that has been purchased in the earliest transaction or the first transaction. So why are we doing this? So by doing this, we ensure that recommendations remain contextually relevant by prioritizing recent transactions. Recent purchases often indicate immediate needs, and also it avoids suggesting irrelevant items tied to outdated patterns. So how are we doing this? So we are doing this by using the concept of within group decay rates. So say like our decay rate is equal to 0.9. So what we'll do is like whichever items have been purchased in the most recent transactions, those will be given uh, high decay rate or like zero point 0.9 to the power 0. So like the items that zero point 0.9 to the power 0 is basically 1. So the items that has been purchased in the third transactions will be given the value 1 and the rest of the items will be 0. Similarly, the items that have been purchased in the second transaction will be given little less weightage, which is basically zero point 0.9 to the power 1, which is basically zero point 0.9. So 0.92 will be assigned to the items that have been purchased in the second transaction, which is basically item number 3, 4, 5, and rest will be 0. And finally, we'll be giving the least weightage to the item that has been purchased in the earliest transaction or the first transaction. So 0.9 to the power 2, which is basically 0.81. So 0.81 will be assigned to the items that have been purchased in transaction number 1, and the rest of the values will be 0. So you can see, right, by using this concept, like we are giving like more weightage to the items that have been purchased in the third transaction, and least weightage is been given to the items that have been purchased in the first transaction. So this helps in like avoiding suggest irrelevant items to outdated patterns, and also like the concept of like the recent purchases often indicate like the immediate needs that is being fulfilled by giving more weightage to the most recent transaction. So that's the temporal effect for you. Now let's get into the coding part of the temporal ripple effect.
That's a wrap for today's video. If you found this content valuable, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on future insights into data science, AI, machine learning, and analytics. Looking to master data science or drive data-driven success? I offer expert training, mentorship, and consultancy for individuals and organizations. Let's collaborate. Reach out via my contact details in the bio.